Let's try it again. Here we go. Okie dokie. Sorry for that. Let's just make sure again. All right, how are we doing? I think we're there. I'm so sorry. So sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties. I apologize greatly. Um, Let me just tweet this out real quick and we will get started. So very sorry. So very sorry. My apologies. Okay. Okay. Copying the link. Here we go. Here we go. We're going to tweet this real quick. Here we go. Cancel, cancel. Here we go. All right. Thank goodness. Sorry about that. Welcome to the 10th installment of UnShrink Me. This is my weekly podcast where we chat and converse about everything relating to psychology, especially clinical psychology, because I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm simply Patrick because, genuinely speaking, I don't want to get sued. And the lovely university and businesses I'm affiliated with, I don't want them to face any backlash because of my private, not so private, personal thoughts here. So I'm more Patrick than I am Dr. Lockwood here, but I will be talking about psychology, clinical psychology in particular. For those of you who don't know, this is entertainment, and so don't sue me. And also be clear that, my comments are only about my experience and my understanding of both the literature and my clinical experience, my personal experience. So you're going to find a lot of professionals out there who have their own podcast, who have their own YouTube channel, so on and so forth, and they're going to have very different opinions. I will say things with a lot of force because, genuinely speaking, I'm fed up with my industry and how sick it is and how we are not doing well as an industry. We have terrible rates of mental health problems and substance use issues. We are not well in the clinical psychology world. So part of what I'm trying to do is to be appropriately critical and skeptical of the industry, which bothers some of my colleagues in person and online. But the truth of the matter is, if people aren't going to be appropriately skeptical and critical, then what that does is it creates a space for activists and very mentally unwell people to be extra critical in a way that's not realistic, not based in the literature, not based in reality. It's based in their fantasies and their beliefs about mental health and their mistreatment and things like that. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit today about a podcast that was very popular this week about this very topic. But the main topic du jour today is men and mental health. And as always, what I do after my little disclaimer up front is I start heading towards the tweets. So let's head towards the tweets. There are a number of things I bookmarked and promised that I would talk about this week. I actually neglected to talk about something a few weeks ago, which I would like to bring up this week. As always, not formally sponsored by Celsius, but thank you so much, Celsius. Your shit's amazing. So, a minute ago, weeks ago actually, I said I was going to talk about something, but I didn't. So the American Heart Association, supposedly a medical body interested in protecting heart health, I would assume, was in a hearing in Texas, of all places. And, Texas is an interesting spot. Texas is sometimes reasonable, sometimes not very reasonable. Anyways, so there's this post, which I'll retweet right now, by Grace Price, that discussed her experience going to Texas Congress to fight a bill that would keep food stamps from being used for candy and soda to reduce heart disease, basically. And so I don't know the specifics of the bill, so I'm not going to speak as if I do, unlike other people online and in the podcast world, Podcastistan, as Sam Harris calls it. Here's what I will say. If we take the most superficial view of this potential bill in Texas, if what it's trying to do is limit the impact of obviously unhealthy, relatively less healthy things on your well-being, it makes sense. If you're on food stamps, maybe you shouldn't be eating these calorie-dense, unhealthy things. And so maybe the government should have some paternalistic role in trying to help people become healthy. But what was weird about this whole episode is that the American Heart Association was trying to fight against this bill. And so I don't think you need a PhD in biology or an MD to understand that highly calorie-dense foods and highly sugary foods are terrible for you. I am not a physician, so don't sue me. Don't treat me like a physician. But you'd have to be an absolute moron to believe that, a gallon of Mountain Dew a day or some shit like that is actually good for you. And I get that people who are poor, who are on food stamps, not that everyone who's on food stamps is poor, by the way, but I get that cheap sources of calories is important if you're poor. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not calloused about that. But there's other cheap sources of calories that aren't going to give you diabetes or heart disease, like soda, for instance. So it's just weird the American Heart Association was fighting the bill. And I just think there's so much grift and corruption in the American Heart Association that we shouldn't take them seriously. That's just me. What would I know? Let's see here. Oh, cool. I want to talk about this because this actually relates to my personal and my professional life. So cold plunging has become very popular, especially in the manosphere. And I want to talk about men's mental health. And so earlier this week or last week, Dr. Rick Pescatori, and I'll give you his handle, at Rick, R-I-C-K _ P-E-S-C-A-T-O-R-E. I'm going to tweet about this real quick. He said this, he shared this anecdote. He works in an ER somewhere, and he said, a dad took his 12-year-old for a cold plunge. A bit of bonding through wellness. The kid had just warmed up in the hot tub, and then he jumped in, gasped, and went under. Because a lot of people, when they cold plunge, they dunk all the way. By the time they pulled him out, his heart had stopped. I coded him for over an hour before I told his dad that he was dead. So Rick does this thread, which I think is worth reading, because I think a lot of people in the clinical world and in the mental health world and in the manosphere are interested in cold plunging. And so again, I'm not a physician, so don't sue me. I also run a business that offers sauna and cold plunges. So as a co-owner of that business, I understand that there is some bias that I have, and I want to try and speak honestly and not just do what the right-wing manosphere thinks is conventional. And I think a lot of people in that category are also fairly reasonable. They're not evil or stupid, but they just, they have a bias. And so here's what I'll say, and I appreciate I tweeted about this publicly a week ago when he first talked about it. I'm very grateful he shared this because a lot of the like fix your body to fix your brain interventions, whether it's like something traditional like psych meds or these non-traditional things like cold plunge and sauna, they all come from a good place. Excuse me. And they all have this basic purpose of trying to regulate things that are currently not well regulated. So I don't have an inherent problem with people putting their beliefs and their faith and their money and their time into psych meds or into saunas and cold plunges. What I have a problem with is when people believe that these are one size fits all tools, or when these tools are used without care for who you currently are, how your body and how your brain are built. And so, to the extent that we can know how you're built and what your risks are, that's important. So, what I will always say is if you're going to do anything psychological, psychiatric, or physical health related, you should be aware of what your various risks are for those health interventions. So, if you're going to work out extensively, but you're not aware of having a heart issue, that's a problem. So, go see your doctor before you choose to, like, all of a sudden start going to the gym. Or if you're like, I listen to this really cool Andrew Huberman, Joe Rogan, whatever podcast, or listen to me, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to give cold plunge a try. Make sure that you're not at risk of having an accident like this 12-year-old did, right? We don't know all the specifics based upon this case of what the 12-year-old's health status was, but like certain things that will predict you having a cold shock response in the literature are well known. And so if you have any of those well-known risk factors, such as metabolic issues, cardiac issues, so on and so forth, then please, please, please don't just like randomly come to my business that offers saunas and cold plunges and just go at it. You know, maybe double check with your doctor if it's okay, if there's any particular risks. And, you know, maybe do a little bit of reading or listening to some experts who talk about this before you go do it, because genuinely speaking, these health interventions can be great. Psych meds, working out, running, lifting weights, saunas, cold plunges, all these things can be good for you. They certainly can be, but you shouldn't take an unnecessary risk, right? And also, you should never put all of your eggs in one basket. And my bias is I've been cold plunging for almost 2 years continuously now, and genuinely speaking, it's the best way to orient myself and get me woken up and ready for the gym early in the morning at 5 in the morning. It works for me. I'm relatively healthy. I'm in relatively good shape. I have cold shock tolerance because I've been doing it consistently. And I didn't start out at like 20 degrees Fahrenheit the first time I did it for 17 minutes. That would kill me. And so I started out very slow with a more tolerable temperature and built my resistance up to colder and colder temperatures. Now, that doesn't mean we understand the full short-term and long-term consequences, both good and bad, of cold plunges. We should be very careful about not overdoing it, but also being aware of all the relative health risks to your heart, to your liver, to your kidneys, to your internal organs in general. Like, you should be careful when you do these things, but they can be extremely helpful. Like, I try to sauna 5-6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, and it makes my life better. But there's a risk to going too long because it can hurt you. So you have to be careful, and I'm very thankful to Rick Pescatori for talking about that. Now let's talk more specifically about the manosphere. And this starts with something that was posted by Chris Williamson, who's like a popular podcaster in the manosphere. He was just on Joe Rogan again. I think he's smart. I think he's a very nice guy. I think he tries to be reasonable, so I'm not here to shit on him. I guess one of the experts he had on his podcast or something is this clinician that I'd never heard of named Adam Lane Smith. And Chris posted a quote that I will read to you, and then I'll repost so everyone can see it and fact check me. And here's the quote from Adam Lane Smith and his handle is at Adam, Lane, Lane Smith. And here's the quote. Male depression is nearly always a result of learned helplessness. But health providers treat it like female depression and try to make men feel loved instead of powerful. Now, I have some problems with that quote that I'd like to break down, but first, some context of who this person is. So in Adam's Twitter bio, he says he's an attachment theory specialist. He has a master's in psychology. I guess he's a master's level therapist, from what I can tell, or maybe a coach. I don't quite know. And his whole, I guess, shtick is about men and helping them in couples work, which is awesome. But I want to take issue with that quote. But before I take issue with that quote, let me read specifically what I read. And I'm just tweeting about it real quick. I said, that's kind of a wild oversimplification. As a clinician, I can't imagine picking one variable or one perspective and thinking, aha, this one thing is the problem. Some dudes need love. Others need status. Others need their ego beat up. Others need community and camaraderie, etc. So my original rebuttal is about the quote. And just to go back to the quote and say it one more time in case any of you missed it, male depression is nearly always a result of learned helplessness. But health providers treat it like female depression and try to make men feel loved instead of powerful. So there's about 6 or 7 things wrong with this from a technical perspective. So number 1, learned helplessness can impair your ability to feel loved. So that's a false dichotomy, as if learned helplessness has nothing to do with feeling loved. That's silly. Number 2, the idea that learned helplessness is always about, making men feel more empowered, right? It's definitely true that men probably do need to feel more empowered nowadays in a world that's been very anti-men in the West for the last 10 years. The culture wars, the lefties have been very anti-masculinity and anti-men. Even the fucking American Psychological Association talked about bullshit toxic masculinity stuff once upon a time, which I critiqued in a video years ago. So I will say that I can resonate with the idea that there is a space for men and for men to have a say about mental health and to feel more empowered, because the world at large, in the culture wars at least, has been very men are bad, men are predators, men are aggressors. And there's a lot of dichotomous thinking in the culture wars about men. And so I appreciate when people try to speak up for men and masculinity, because it's a world where masculinity is changing and in many ways being denigrated by outside forces and by men who are unwell themselves, including Andrew Tate and the likes of them. And so what I would like to just talk about is these other things that I said in response to this quote. So sometimes if you're a male and you're depressed, it's the case that maybe you do need to feel more loved, and that's how you'll feel empowered. Sometimes a really good romantic relationship will allow you to feel more powerful because you have a partner of an equal caliber that allows you to feel balanced out, complete, whatever the kind of corny adjective is. And so I would imagine that a good relationship would help with male depression. Also, sometimes dudes just need a kick in the ass and they need their ego beat up. There are many people out there on the male side of the equation who think really highly of themselves and they haven't earned shit. So, for instance, let's just talk about the world of being famous. There are a lot of people on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter or X, etc., Facebook, who are famous because they're hot, and so they have like a great body and great hair, or because they've got a great smile or a great jawline, and that's all awesome. But they haven't really earned anything. They've got like a genetic gift, or they've worked really hard in the gym, but they haven't really done shit. So that's one group of people. Another group of people are the political punditry class, right? So you've got like all these people in the culture wars who haven't really done anything with their life, but they consider themselves brave heroes, right? So like one of my favorite is this cuck named Tim Pool. So Tim Pool is this moderately well-known journalist, podcaster, YouTuber who has been on the culture war side of the news, the writer wing centrist side of things. And he's such a feckless little person, but because he's been able to, argue on Joe Rogan against Jack Dorsey and Vijayagata or whatever about X and Twitter, and because he's had some notable like quotes and experiences with his show and his podcast, that he's a high status creature in the journalism news world, even though personally he seems like a giant waste of space from what I can tell. And so there's an entire market, there's an attention market out there in Podcastistan, in the news world, in the influencer world, in the Instagram fitness world, and so on. There's all these different places where people who have no real value for the world, but they're good talkers, or they're hot, or they're good at being polemical and getting attention. These people haven't done shit for the world. But they say the right things that the right people are interested in, and the same thing's true for like Andrew Tate. He seems like a completely useless, overhyped person who is taught, he has this crappy university where he teaches men to be men or how to be players or whatever. And like he's made a bunch of money and he's got, anyways, and he was a fighter at one point. Whatever. All of that's fine. And I'm not trying to say that these are inherently bad or evil people. It's not all or nothing. It's just that if you don't get your ego beat up by life, where you can't sustain a romantic relationship, or you can't sustain a business, or you can't sustain a reputation with your friends and your family, then you're probably pretty useless. And I just think that these dudes, some of them might be miserable because they have fake status. They have fake earned it in life, right? And so maybe their misery is earned because they're overcompensating in other ways. Oh, we have a comment. The real PC boy says, is it okay to burp while speaking to the public? Of course it is. I'm a regular person. Do you think I give a shit? I don't care. This is not the Patrick Lockwood is perfectly put together and lovely and polite podcast. This is I'm a real person podcast, which is what the world wants, and it's who I am. So I burp sometimes. Congratulations. But just to continue on with the rant here, I would say that it's when we oversimplify anyone's mental health, women or men, gay or straight, whatever, trans, doesn't matter. When we oversimplify people's mental health, it's a problem. The problem is very simple. Yes, men need to feel powerful. I would agree with that generalization. But when we overgeneralize, that's a cognitive error, right? So maybe men can feel powerful doing multiple things by being a father, right? And many of my friends my age have just had kids, and they absolutely love it. And they feel empowered by being a dad. Or they feel empowered by starting a business, or by being a good provider, or by being a good husband, or by taking better care of their body, or whatever it is. There's tons of things we can do to feel empowered. But learned helplessness is a feature of depression, and it might be a driving factor for some types of depression, but there's not just one kind of depression in men, right? So overgeneralizing is stupid. And I get that Adam Lane said something to a particular person who, like Chris, and I like Chris Williamson, so I'm not trying to trash Chris, but like the manosphere needs more nuance because dudes are complicated just like women are. I think there's a stereotype that dudes aren't complicated, but I promise you, dudes are complicated no differently than women are, just in different culturally sanctioned, biologically sanctioned ways, right? So some guys, they definitely need to get their ego beat up in order to overcome their low mood issues and their self-esteem issues. Or they need to have better friends who are like more thoughtful and more aware and not douchebags, for instance. Because maybe your douchebaggy friends, your frat bro friends, aren't actually helping you be accountable, because accountability and integrity are usually considered more masculine traits and principles, even though they're not. But like, if it is the case that you come from a culture where being a man is equated with being accountable and integral, then maybe if you have shitty friends, you're going to be miserable because your shitty friends aren't supporting you. Maybe you've chosen to stick around shitty friends. You need to grow the fuck up and find better friends, perhaps. So I think there's a lot of different biopsychosocial pathways for males to overcome and manage depression better. Some of which has to do with status and learned helplessness, some of which has to do with your friends and your romantic partners, and some of which has to do with your beliefs and your biases. Or maybe you're just an idiot, right? You could just be stupid. There's a lot of stupid guys out there who just don't know anything. So maybe you need to learn how to pay better attention or understand your personality better. There's so many possible variables that oversimplifying men and mental health is stupid. And that's why I can't stand the Andrew Tates of the world. And, as much as Jordan Peterson's a great guy who's helping people, especially men, he's also guilty of oversimplifying sometimes, right? And so we need to not oversimplify. We need to be more honest about all the potential variables. And I find that when people are prone to oversimplifying, they're just projecting their own shit. So maybe Adam and Chris like this way of thinking because these are their own issues, their own struggles. And if that's the case, no worries. Because that's pretty much how everyone functions. Almost everyone projects all day, right? It's not weird. So if this is what you believe the quote-unquote truth is, it's probably because that's your experience in the world. And that's not weird, and I don't judge that necessarily. I just think that we should stop taking seriously or so seriously these clowns who oversimplify things. Everyone in Podcastistan has a right to speak and should share their story and their perspective. And man, are we really going to exalt people like Andrew Tate? Are we really going to exalt, let's talk about Jordan Peterson for a minute. I love Jordan, and I think that he has been so helpful in so many ways. I also think he's been so not helpful in so many ways. And the reason he's been not helpful is because he looks and sounds miserable. And that should not be a role model. I'm not saying he should be happy and naive and Pollyanna to be a good male role model. But he screams or gets worked up about nonsense. He doesn't scream. He gets worked up about nonsense, which makes me think his high trait neuroticism is not well managed. And that's not very manly, right? But he also doesn't allow nuance to run the show. And he could, because he's wicked smart and he's been around and he's lived a long life and done a bunch of things. So I have respect for him. I just don't respect certain things that he does when he's trying to talk about men and mental health, or just mental health in general, because he's part of the culture war, and audience capture has kind of started to rot his brain, I think. And so we need a more diverse ecosystem of male and masculine influencers. And so Andrew Huberman's a good scientist who's trying to be in the manosphere and help. Chris Williamson is trying. Joe Rogan's doing his thing. There are a lot of cool people out there who are doing things, especially in the service of men and mental health. But I think there's a lot of people with a lack of interest in all the experiences and shades of gray that exist, right? So for instance, there's a segment of men and mental health that doesn't get any press in the manosphere that should, and it's actually it's a small group of people, but it's not a tiny group of people. And it's gay men, believe it or not. Now, again, I have a bias here because of my life and my husband and all this shit, but here's what I'll tell you. There are so many very, very mentally unwell gay men who have the worst possible relationship with masculinity, drugs, sex, and mental health. In fact, a large percentage of gay men, of the 7% of the population that are gay men or whatever. Like, literally, they are unwell in all sorts of ways. Back when I ran an LGBT rehab, I saw this literally every day in my business. And I see podcasts about this, like, Manny Rodriguez and La Fuente Hollywood Treatment Center do this perfectly in their most recent podcast with Rory Hunter. And what I will tell you is that the manosphere could actually bring in gay men if they wanted to and help them to some degree, because gay men in particular have a horrible relationship with masculinity because of internalized homophobia and because of shame around their bodies in general and hyper-competitive sexuality and all sorts of shit that straight men completely understand and relate to a significant degree. So what I would genuinely like to say is that there's a way for, the manosphere to have different perspectives, more complicated and rich perspectives that will allow dudes to get the bottom line and not worry neurotically and think too much, but also see themselves as the regular, ordinarily complicated people that they are, where it's not just all learned helplessness has made you a little bitch, and therefore you have to channel your inner whatever it is in order to be the alpha whatever crap, which is like the Andrew Tate bullshit of the world. And like, there's so many gay men, for instance, who fall prey to that way of functioning, where I have to overcompensate and be steroided up and fuck everyone that walks in order to be worthy. And it's just stupid. And it's killing people, right? Like, people are dying from drug overdoses. People are dying from manageable, curable, treatable diseases because of this, right? And suicide in men is also a leading cause of death. Heart disease and suicide and drug use, it's out of control. And it's not because men are inherently stupid or weaker or smarter or whatever it is. It's because we have shitty role models, we have a shitty culture, and we need people who understand. We need to find people who are understanding of the complicated nature of things. Here's a comment that just came in that's also perfect for this conversation. So Raz Sebastian said, I can't find my support services covered by Medicaid. Groups or therapists that are not postmodern critical social justice feminist services. Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you for sharing. So also, my profession has become corrupted. There are many good providers. I consider myself one of them, where I appreciate and value men and masculinity. And I don't believe in the political nonsense of the last 10 years and the trendiness of the last 10 years. If you're really a good DEI person, you should appreciate traditional masculinity because it's part of the richness of human experience. It's neither inherently good nor inherently bad. And these facile, childish ways of talking about men, the APA blog, you can still find it, I bet, on men and boys and toxic masculinity. It's such horseshit. And it's unscientific and it's activist crap. And it's not realistic because guys are complicated. And so when Sebastian's talking about the fact that he can't find a mental health provider covered by private insurance, covered by Medicaid, Medicare, or whatever it is that actually is not so beaten down by DEI bullshit or wokeness, or who's not the opposite problem, right? One of the problems I see is they have to be like this in order to overcompensate in the opposite direction, and that's equally bad. So don't be like that. That's fucking stupid. And so when you're bombarded by people who have these highly politicized opinions, and that's what drives their clinical care, you're actually hurting people. That's bad. So don't do that. Be a good clinician, care about what the data say, understand culture and norms, and don't judge people for their differences. Allow them to be importantly different. Okay? We get that, everybody? I hope everyone gets that because this shouldn't be complicated, but I guess it is. So that's a lot of meshuggah about like men and masculinity and mental health. And what I will just say is, you don't have to be miserable and stoic and killing yourself to be a good dude. You also don't have to be super feminine or whatever it is to be a good dude. You could be whatever you actually are. So if you're a higher estrogen guy or whatever, and you're a little more feminine or in touch with creativity and art or whatever, awesome, be fucking that. And if you are a little more on the stoic side or neurodivergent or whatever it is, be that. Be whatever the fuck you are. Who cares? Be you. But also, don't buy into these one size fits all pleas for masculinity, because like, you should be doing hard things. I think dudes on average are more interested in challenging physical and economic things, but that's like it's an oversimplification. So let's find mental health providers. Let's extol the virtues of different types of understanding the unique needs of men, because it's not just the Andrew Tate, the Joe Rogan, the Andrew Huberman. It's not just these one size fits all people. It's really complicated. Dudes are complicated. So, dear Adam Lane Smith, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk with you about it. But try to get quotes that are a little more complicated than these like glorified manosphere sayings, because it's just not true. Maybe that's your clinical experience, Adam, but it's not true from the point of view of the data, the literature, whatever. Continuing on with this discussion of men and mental health, I have this friend online, a psychologist named Edward A. Perrin, at Dr. Perin. I love him to death. I think he and I don't always see eye to eye, but I wanted to read this tweet that he put out this morning and tie it into men and mental health, because it certainly relates in an important way to what I'm trying to talk about, with nuance and understanding who the person actually is, not what we wish they would be. So, his tweet this morning was, "Your therapist is failing you if they only tell you the world and society need to change to better accommodate you. Don't get me wrong, I also believe society can do better. But effective therapy empowers you to navigate the world as it is." So, here is why this is super important to me. And I love Dr. Perrin for this. So, there's definitely been a push in the postmodern, fixed society, social determinants of health world. This goes something like this. Excuse me. That society is so broken. Excuse me. And society's so bad. Men are so bad, masculinity is bad, etc., that unless the systems of power change, women and trans and Uzbekistani child clown sex performers or whatever are going to be forever killed, and the puppies are going to die because society is so bad. And like, I have lots of critiques of society. I'm sure Dr. P has tons of critiques of society as well. He said that in his tweet. But the problem with treating therapy like social justice activism, or treating clinical work in general, psychiatry, social work, like that, and focusing on that and emphasizing that, is you're neglecting the fact that people see themselves as individuals. Whether or not, like, Brian Lowry is this social psychologist who goes full social constructivist, and I think he's smart, and it's an awesome book and podcast you can listen to with Xavier Bonilla about it. But like, I don't agree that the average person walking around see themselves as purely a collective and like a node in a system. It's true that we are nodes in systems, but like, we're still nodes. So we're individuals. And so when you hyper focus on society and the way society is oppressing you and blah, 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 the problem is You're de-emphasizing the individuality of the person, which is why, there was this giant void that Jordan Peterson walked right into a decade ago, basically, and was like, listen, you're an individual, take responsibility, make your bed. And people loved it because that was the opposite message they had been getting for years. And there's been this overreaction, the opposite direction, which I am also fighting against as well in this conversation. But here's the problem. When your therapist says to you, oh, you poor thing, society is so sexist, society is so racist, society is so blah, 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 that there's two messages a person can receive when you hear those words from a powerful professional like a doctor, an MD, a PhD, PsyD, or even a master's level therapist, a person of authority. Two messages are, oh, you poor thing, which has problems, by the way. And the second message is, you are forever doomed because society is so sick. And that is a terrible and disempowering message. Almost no one who is making it in life sees themselves as forever doomed. I have friends of all races and gender experiences who are busting their ass and they're making it. And they're not living with this mindset of forever doomed. You can acknowledge that society is broken in various ways and problematic or not in your favor, and at the same time see yourself as an agent capable of doing things despite your obstacles. And society needs to hear more of that message that I just literally said. So I'll say it again in case you missed it. Society is broken. There are problems in every culture, every country, every nation, etc. Various groups of people are stigmatized, marginalized, looked down upon, treated as less than, purely because of their group status. That is true. All of those things are true. They're unequivocally true. And literally speaking, despite those things being true, you are a capable agent. You have a personality style and an intelligence that are your resources that will allow you to go do things in this really messed up world that we live in. So for instance, you might not be the smartest person. Maybe your IQ is average. Maybe you have verbal fluency skills that are low or fluid reasoning skills that are low, whatever. But maybe you have a pretty good working memory and you can use that skill of yours in various types of jobs or in various types of arts or relationships. Also, maybe you're conventionally attractive to some degree and you can use that, or you can work out more and get more attractive and use that to better your life. Or maybe you're funny, or maybe you're boring. Maybe you're not the most evocative person, but you have a skill or a trade you're really good at. You're a good welder, for instance. Heaven forbid you make money being a welder. Like, there's so many things. You don't have to be an influencer on YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is to live a good life. A lot of people, a lot of dudes in particular, can get help by just recognizing who they actually are, what their actual strengths and gifts are, and their actual deficits are, and building a life based upon that. And then finding relationships that build you up, like good friends, family if they're not sick and fucked off, spouses, romantic partners, whoever it is. We have power. We are not powerless as creatures. And when especially men are told, you are powerless, if it's bad for women, it's also bad for men. Right? So when men are told, and this is one of the things I hate about the manosphere, right? The right-wingers and the agitates and the Matrix is coming to get me and all that bullshit. Like, dudes are definitely being shit-talked and have been shit-talked for years in this industry and in the culture war and all this stuff. But, like, you're still capable. You're clearly still powerful. incapable. So who the fuck cares what they're saying in the culture wars? Go do something. Go build something. Go earn something. Go become something. Right? As your clinician, right? If you're telling people, oh, you poor thing, you're disempowered, it's true that you've experienced discrimination. It's true that you've experienced prejudice of some kind, maybe multiple kinds. That doesn't mean you're without power. All those years of working at La Fuente, the LGBT rehab, I never once looked at my trans patients or my gay male patients or whatever and said, oh, you poor thing. I always tried to have an honest conversation about their real experiences of discrimination and feeling disempowered or disenfranchised in mainstream LGBT culture, but also the world in general, because those are real things that happen to them. And I also emphasize the fact that you are a capable person with actual gifts, with actual skills. Some of them maybe you've worked at, some of them maybe you didn't earn. They're just luck, because luck is a thing. And that's awesome. And so go build a life based upon your skills, not based upon your resentments, not based upon the shitty politics of the world or the social norms of the world. The social norms of the world are only about homeostasis, not about thriving. And I want you to thrive. When I work as a consultant in businesses, I don't want you to function. I want you to thrive. So as a consultant, my job is like diagnosing the system, understanding the personality of all the players, the leaders, the grunts, whatever, so that we can thrive, not so that we can be okay. Now, for some people, just being okay because they're so mentally ill or medically screwed, that's nirvana. And I understand that. But for men in particular, you need to have something to live up to. You need to have something to thrive towards, not fall apart because of. So for me, I think clinicians in particular, therapists of every degree level, and when I supervise my interns, I give them a very similar spiel, which is like, we have to see people as capable creatures, not victims to their parents and their families, not victims to society or the cartels, because I work in drug rehab land. It's like, we are only victims insofar as we live in victim mentality after the experience of victimization is over. If you're currently being victimized, then you're currently a victim. If you have been victimized, you now have something you have to understand, manage, and maybe even grow through if it's possible. So dudes in therapy need to hear that they are capable change agents. They are not maybe masters of their life, but they are capable of having mastery, an old school psychodynamic concept, in their life in order to be healthy. So please, for the love of God, therapists of every degree level, psychiatrists, if you're telling people that the world and society have to change for them to feel better, fuck off. Because you're not helping, you're hurting people. We need to treat people as capable agents of change. That doesn't mean ignoring or minimizing how screwed up society is, or how bad racism is, or sexism is, or whatever. It means acknowledging those things and focusing on what's in the person's actual sphere of influence. So please stop focusing on society. Focus on what the person's capable of. What are their strengths? What are their gifts, for the love of God? Please. All right. This is going well. So, probably canceled at this point. Whatever. I wish I could be canceled. Cancel me. Sorry. It's just been years of doing these YouTube lives and going on people's podcasts, and I just have yet to be canceled. Like, come on now. I'm trying so hard. All right. I want to talk about this back and forth that I got into to kind of end today's broadcast of UnShrink Me. with this conversation around the concept of depth. So this is especially true for the manosphere, especially the influencers in the manosphere, like, again, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Rob Henderson, Chris Williamson, what is Jordan Peterson's friend? Jonathan Vervaeke, right? There's a lot of academics, philosophers, fake philosophers, influencers, mental health influencers, a lot of people, especially on the manosphere side of things, who for some reason care a great deal about the concept of depth. Let's get deep. It's the deepity of it all. Like Jordan Peterson rambles about Carl Jung, and Jonathan Vervaeke rambles about every philosopher under the sun when he does podcasts. And so, like, I'm going to read something I said earlier this week and ramble a little bit about it, because I believe that there is a lack of emotional resilience in the people who care incessantly about depth, who talk incessantly about resolving your deep shit or whatever it is, or understanding yourself in a deep way. Like, I grew up with a psychoanalyst, so I kind of understand what the upside is. I kind of know, because I was part of the Society for Psychoanalytic Self-Psychology for years. So I get depth psychology very, very well. I've practiced it. I understand it. But let me read my thoughts, because I think there's a problem. So the problem is, I don't think there's much depth in psychology. I said this 4 days ago in response to my friend Dr. Edward Perrin. And here's my more expanded thoughts that I talked about. People, I said this 4 days ago, people thinking about depth are terrified of the present moment. People who live in their heads, philosophers, academics, whatever, pondering depth, often hate their present moment experience. To me, caring about depth is the defense of intellectualizing. Profundity is a normal emotional response to what we feel is meaningful or important. People chasing the profound are what I call meaning junkies, who cannot accept and tolerate the ordinariness and the transitoriness of experience. So maybe I kind of slipped into Sam Harris mode a little bit there. If you don't know, Sam Harris is one of these like modern Buddhist whatever philosopher, psychologist people, waking up podcasts. It's great. But let me just break this down for a second, because I want to make sure, when it comes to masculinity and men in particular, but also every person of all experiences, I get why some people hate the shallow, right? Like the social media version of life, the reality TV show version of life is disgusting because it's so shallow and vapid and superficial and meaningless that, like, it's disgusting. And a lot of people have had their media diet in particular be very shallow. So when Jordan Peterson came around a while ago, and a lot of the right-wing manosphere, deep, let's get deep and profound, like, I get it, because, like, there's the death of God from Nietzsche and all these things. So, like, maybe society is missing depth right now. Fair enough. Totally fair. What I believe has happened is an overreaction to some degree, because in reality, my belief, my understanding, both as a clinician and as a regular person, is that our moment-to-moment experience, and maybe this is just because I was a practiced kind of meditator for a long time, obviously not much anymore, but the ordinariness of life and the transitoriness of life, the nonstop changingness of life, is often difficult for people to tolerate. And I think especially guys, because guys are often more of a doer. They don't like sitting around in many cases. And so navel gazing and introspecting and stuff feels like you're doing something, right? And so if you're just non-judgmentally aware of the present moment, that might be painful or even intolerable for some people. I especially believe that's true in the intellectual side of the right-wing manosphere, or just the manosphere in general, because once we acknowledge the ordinariness of life and the transitoriness of life, it can be scary for people. So I think if they can find more depth, if we can ramble on about philosophy or Carl Jung or Nietzsche or whatever it is, maybe it will all be worth something at the end of the day. And this is why I think I've always appreciated people like Camus, Albert Camus. Because when you really think about the existential problem we all face, which is what is life all about? Why does it mean anything? What is meaning? How does meaning matter? What creates meaning? All the shit that Jordan Peterson and his friends talk about. It's a lot. It's a lot to comprehend society and life and economics and politics and how did we get here and what kind of dumb luck is it that I'm even existing in this moment right now? How lucky am I to be able to do this podcast and drink an overpriced energy drink and what's simultaneously very cheap? Like, I have a phenomenal life in a way that I can't even comprehend. And my life isn't perfect. Like a house's worth of student loans, but I have like great cats and a great partner and great businesses I get to consult for and work for, and I get to teach and influence the next generation of therapists. Like, my life is amazing by historical standards because for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, hominids, humans have been like miserable and starving and not able to like really relax and ponder the meaning of life. So we live, all of us, myself included, live in this like historically amazing experience, privileged experience, to use the P word. And so what I will say is, I think because life is so good, people are terrified of life being boring, ordinary, transitory. And Camus says you have to create meaning. You have to see the absurdity in things, and you have to find your way through it by doing everything you can to be present. And it's okay to want depth or search for depth or find depth. But when people are obsessed with depth, I think they're terrified of the present moment. And the present moment is not necessarily deep. In fact, I think the present moment is rarely profound or deep. I think life in its big pictureness is deep. But I don't think life in the present momentness of it has to be deep in order for it to be meaningful or important. I think the absurd can be meaningful and important. I think the simple can be meaningful and important. I think the deep can. I think the tragic can. I think the great can. I think the fun. I think everything could be important if you wanted it to be. And that is different than, in a meaningful way, things having to be deep for them to be important. And I just think the navel gazers and the philosophers and the YouTubers who care about depth are actually just avoiding the present moment. I think they're terrified of real life. I also think they look miserable. I think a lot of these, especially in the manosphere, influencers look miserable. Tim Pool doesn't look happy. I mean, a lot of these people look miserable. Jordan Peterson does not look like a well-adjusted, healthy person. He looks miserable. So, I guess we're kind of near the end of our time. I hope something I've said today has caused you to think a little bit more about your expectations of yourself, how to have more fun, how to be more mindful, how to take better care of your body and your brain and your thoughts and your feelings. I am explicitly anti-thinking. I'm explicitly anti-depth. I think there's so much cool shit happening in the present moment that if you pay attention and you don't psychoanalyze it to death, you can actually enjoy your life and not be miserable. And I'm here for you to not be miserable. I pray, please like, share, and subscribe if you would like. Help me get a little more well-known so I can have more fun conversations with guests and things like that. and take good care of yourself. Eat some good food. And as always, I end this show with a terrible dad joke. And so here's a brand new dad joke from me created today. So I once had this patient, because I am a clinical psychologist, who has this disorder called pica. And if you've never heard of it, pica is this interesting condition where people, often with developmental disabilities, people who are on the autism spectrum or IQ, very low IQ, eat non-food things. They eat like markers and like sand and stuff like that. And we don't quite know why. Maybe it's an anxiety issue. Maybe it's a tactile thing. No clue. Anyways, I had this really weird patient. He was weird. He was a strange creature, like stranger than my jacket. Just an odd duck who had pica. And, you know, his main fascination was he was obsessed with trying to eat clocks and watches. And so he would incessantly buy cheap watches and try to eat them. He would fail because it's hard to swallow like a watch face, whatever it is. But like he would eat them. And after a couple of sessions, he asked me, like, I know I have this weird obsession. What do you really think about my desire to eat clocks and watches? And I said, well, it sounds like it's very time consuming. Have a good day.